How should you train to increase the width, thickness, and three-dimensionality of your back? These are all the muscles in the back. The width of the back comes from the developed outer extension of the latissimus dorsi. These muscle fibers, which run almost vertically, stretch from the sides of your lower back, pass through the armpits, and attach to the upper arm bone. When they contract, they pull your upper arm downwards, corresponding to exercises like lat pull-downs and straight arm pull-down rib exercises. So to widen your back, you should do more of these types of exercises. The thickness of the back depends on the muscle fibers that run almost horizontally, which correspond to rowing exercises. But why do some people not feel their latissimus dorsi being engaged during rowing exercises? This requires understanding the trapezius muscle above. The middle and lower trapezius muscle fibers are very similar in direction to those of the latissimus dorsi. The middle trapezius functions to pull the shoulder blades towards the spine, while the lower trapezius lowers the shoulder blades, or in other words, depresses the shoulders. So, if you actively puff out your chest, depress your shoulders, and retract your shoulder blades during rowing exercises, you will primarily train the middle and lower trapezius. The correct posture should have the thoracic spine in a neutral position, with the shoulder blades relaxed. Don't focus too much on them. Instead, concentrate on the lower latissimus dorsi to better engage the back muscles. Another point is that most rowing machines in gyms have a movement trajectory that goes from the front and bottom to the back and top, which is another reason for low latissimus dorsi involvement. As we can see from the diagram, the fibers of the latissimus dorsi mostly run in a 45 degrees downward direction, so the trajectory of rowing movements should also go from the front and top to the back and bottom to better align with the direction of these muscle fibers. If you don't have such a machine, you can substitute it with a cable machine. The three-dimensionality of the back is determined by the trapezius muscle above. The trapezius is divided into upper, middle, and lower regions. Unless you're competing or have other special needs, you don't need to specifically train the upper trapezius. It can be developed through other exercises. The lower trapezius's primary function is to lower the shoulder blades, and you can do 2 or 3 sets of shoulder depressions during warm-ups before pull-ups. The thickness of the middle trapezius is crucial for the details of the upper back, so we should dedicate a specific exercise to it, such as reverse pec deck, reverse flies, or bent over rows. Based on the information above, we can derive the training plan shown in the diagram. This is a general reference, and the specific training exercises can be adjusted according to your own experience. If you feel more engaged with lat pull-downs than with pull-ups, you can choose your exercises according to your habits. But remember that the total number of sets for the latissimus dorsi should not exceed 12 sets per session. 1 set of lat pull-downs counts as half a set for the lower trapezius, and 1 set of rowing counts as half a set for the middle trapezius, so 4 to 6 sets for the trapezius are enough. Compound exercises should account for 75% of the workout. Compound movements stimulate the muscles to withstand greater tension, lower the levels of myostatin, which inhibits muscle growth, and increase synthesis signaling pathways. Whether to use a wide grip or narrow grip depends on your own activation feeling. It's not necessarily true that a wider grip results in a wider back, or that a narrower grip targets the lower latissimus dorsi more effectively. How are carbohydrates absorbed and utilized by the body? What role do they play in muscle growth and athletic performance? To understand their function, we first need to know what carbohydrates are. Carbohydrates are organic compounds composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The ratio of hydrogen to oxygen in carbohydrates is the same as in water, which is why they are called carbohydrates. They can be classified into 3 main types based on their chemical structure: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are the simplest form of carbohydrates and the smallest sugar units. Disaccharides consist of 2 monosaccharides, while polysaccharides are composed of multiple monosaccharides. There's also a type called oligosaccharides, but we don't need to focus on that. The key focus should be on monosaccharides because disaccharides and polysaccharides need to be broken down into monosaccharides by a series of digestive enzymes before they can be absorbed and utilized by our bodies. Common monosaccharides include glucose, fructose, and galactose. A person's blood sugar level refers to the amount of glucose in the blood, and glucose is the primary energy source for the body's cells. Fructose is the natural sweetener found in fruits, while galactose is primarily found in dairy products in the form of lactose. Now that we understand the basic forms of carbohydrates, let's look at how they are digested and absorbed. Carbohydrates are mainly found in the foods we eat, such as rice, noodles, vegetables, and fruits. When we start eating, the food enters the mouth, stimulating the secretion of saliva. The digestive enzymes in saliva begin breaking down these carbohydrates into smaller sugar molecules. These molecules then travel down the esophagus to the stomach, where they are further broken down by stomach acid. Afterward, they pass through the stomach to the small intestine, which is the main site for carbohydrate digestion and absorption. As the food moves through the small intestine, the pancreas secretes amylase, which continues breaking down carbohydrates into monosaccharides. The villi in the small intestine also have an enzyme that helps further break down carbohydrates into monosaccharide molecules. These monosaccharides then pass through the intestinal wall and enter the liver via the portal vein system. The portal vein is a special blood vessel system that transports nutrients from digestion directly to the liver. In the liver, glucose can be directly utilized or stored as glycogen, but fructose and galactose must be converted into glucose before being released. That's right. Glucose is the end product that matters. This means that no matter what form of carbohydrate you consume, whether sugar, starch, or vegetables, they all have to be converted into glucose by the liver, because glucose is the only form of sugar that our body can utilize. Glucose can be transported through the blood to any cell in the body, including muscle cells. Speaking of muscles, we need to understand insulin. When glucose enters the bloodstream, blood sugar levels start to rise. As blood sugar rises, the beta cells in the pancreas are stimulated and release insulin. Insulin plays a crucial role by mediating the transfer of glucose from the blood into cells throughout the body. Without insulin, cells cannot absorb glucose, and glucose would remain in the bloodstream, leading to elevated blood sugar levels. When glucose enters muscle cells, one of two things can happen. If you're exercising, the demand for energy in muscle fibers is high. In this case, glucose is immediately converted into ATP through glycolysis and used as energy. But if the muscle is at rest, glucose will be stored as glycogen within the muscle fibers. Regular exercise increases the ability of skeletal muscle to store glycogen. Trained individuals can have 20 to 30% higher glycogen levels compared to untrained individuals, allowing them to sustain higher intensity exercise for longer periods. Exercise also has a unique phenomenon. Active skeletal muscle fibers can utilize glucose without needing insulin, and for 1 to 2 hours after exercise, muscles significantly reduce their dependence on insulin. Insulin not only helps transport glucose into muscle cells, but also promotes the uptake of amino acids and the synthesis of proteins. That's why many athletes and fitness enthusiasts take advantage of this time window to quickly consume carbohydrates and protein. After exercise, glycogen stores in muscles are depleted, putting the muscles in a catabolic state. Timely glycogen replenishment can reduce muscle breakdown by increasing insulin levels, accelerate the overall recovery process, and reduce the duration of muscle fatigue and soreness. Additionally, several studies have shown that adding protein to carbohydrate intake can speed up glycogen replenishment. This is why many fitness supplements contain both simple carbohydrates and protein. These simple carbohydrates are usually in the form of high glycemic index sugars, because they need to be quickly absorbed and delivered to the muscles. If you are too tired after training to prepare a meal, you can opt for mass gainer supplements. Most mass gainers combine carbohydrates with protein to enhance the speed of replenishment, making them a convenient option for comprehensive post-workout recovery. Lastly, replenishing glycogen is not only a reasonable choice after exercise, it's also appropriate during prolonged physical activity lasting more than 1 to 2 hours, or when running a half or full marathon. During sustained exercise, an individual's glycogen stores may become depleted, and consuming quickly absorbable carbohydrates can help restore energy to the muscles, allowing for sustained high performance during exercise. The same applies to muscle building training. If we can continuously replenish glycogen in a timely manner, we can train more muscle groups in a single session, thereby improving efficiency. Is a caloric surplus necessary for muscle growth? A caloric surplus means that the calories consumed through diet exceed the calories expended by the body. On the contrary, a caloric deficit means that the calories consumed are insufficient to meet the body's energy expenditure. This energy expenditure includes breathing, blood circulation, organ functions, physical activity, and more. When we are in a state of caloric surplus, the body is better able to activate an anabolic environment. This includes many signaling pathways, such as MPO2, insulin, RGF1 nuclear factor, caffeine B, thyroid hormones, and so on. These signaling pathways interact with each other to better promote the synthesis of fat and muscle protein in the body. On the other hand, when we are in a state of caloric deficit, the body activates a series of catabolic pathways, including AMPK, cortisol, FOXO, and transcription factors like biquinone propedison and autophagy. These pathways are activated to break down the body's protein and fat reserves to provide energy and sustain life in times of energy shortage. From the above metabolic mechanisms, it's evident that a caloric surplus is more conducive to muscle growth. But does this mean that muscle growth is impossible under a caloric deficit? To understand this, we first need to consider the roles of training and nutrition in muscle growth. Essentially, training is the stimulus for muscle growth. Muscle hypertrophy is the body's response to external pressure, so if we don't exert pressure on the muscles through training, the body has no reason to retain or increase muscle mass. On the other hand, nutrition plays a supportive role. It cannot provide the stimulus for hypertrophy on its own. Therefore, in some cases, even under a slight caloric deficit or at maintenance levels, it is possible to see an increase in muscle mass while reducing fat. This phenomenon is known as body recomposition and is often seen in novice trainees or when weightlifters resume training after a long break. However, it is commonly believed that this situation does not usually occur in experienced trainees. This notion, though, is somewhat oversimplified. For example, a particular study analyzed this and concluded that body recomposition is actually possible even in well-trained weightlifters. So this almost answers our main question. Muscle growth can occur without a caloric surplus. But now we need to determine whether a caloric surplus is more effective for muscle growth compared to maintaining caloric balance or being in a deficit. Unfortunately, there is very limited direct comparative data in this area, so we must draw conclusions from different studies. First, let's look at a study comparing the effects of faster versus slower weight loss on body composition in experienced trainees. The subjects were divided into two groups. The first group was set to lose 0.7% of their body weight per week for 10 to 12 weeks, while the second group aimed to lose 1.4% of their body weight per week for 4 to 6 weeks. All participants engaged in regular resistance training during the diet period. The results showed that although both groups lost the same amount of weight overall, the group that lost weight more slowly actually gained a small amount of muscle mass and lost more fat, while the group that lost weight faster saw a slight loss of muscle mass and less fat reduction. This suggests that a severe caloric deficit may cause some slight muscle loss even in experienced trainees. Another similar study compared the effects of a larger caloric surplus versus a moderate caloric surplus on body composition. The first group was deliberately assigned a larger caloric surplus to promote more muscle growth, while the other group was allowed to eat freely without specific rules. Both groups consisted of trained individuals who continued with regular resistance training during the study. The results showed that the group with a larger caloric surplus did indeed experience slightly more muscle growth, but they also gained significantly more fat. From these two studies, we can conclude that a caloric surplus is generally more effective for muscle growth compared to maintaining caloric balance or being in a deficit. Any degree of surplus may promote muscle growth, but if the deficit is too large, it can lead to muscle loss. However, many other factors unrelated to calories can also affect muscle growth. The first and most important factor is the training stimulus. The effectiveness of the training program is the most crucial determinant of muscle hypertrophy response. Training stimulus depends on factors such as training volume, proximity to failure, lifting technique, and so on. We continually strive to find more effective ways to stimulate muscles, while poor stimulus can reduce the likelihood or speed of muscle growth. The second non-caloric factor is protein intake. It is well known that higher protein intake is beneficial for muscle growth during both caloric surplus and deficit periods. For example, a meta-analysis found a nearly linear positive correlation between total protein intake and muscle growth, but the benefits diminish beyond a range of 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Therefore, a higher protein intake increases the rate of muscle growth, regardless of the individual's caloric state. The third factor is sensitivity to training. Beginners experience rapid muscle growth in the first few months because all the signaling pathways in their bodies are more sensitive to training. So, beginners can potentially gain muscle more quickly, regardless of their caloric state. The final factor is your current body fat level. When men's body fat drops below 10%, or women's drops below 18%, muscle building capacity may be slightly limited, possibly due to unfavorable hormonal changes in the body. For example, in this case, we can see that as athletes reduce their body fat percentage to around 5% during bodybuilding competitions, testosterone levels drop significantly, but return to normal after the competition as body fat increases again. Therefore, for those with low body fat, if their testosterone levels are already low, it will be even more challenging to gain muscle in a caloric deficit. In conclusion, while a caloric surplus is not mandatory for muscle growth, it may be necessary. You certainly don't want your hard-earned training to go to waste, but to avoid gaining unnecessary fat, you should adjust your total caloric intake according to your body composition changes. A general recommendation is to start with a 10% surplus and adjust gradually.